You don't wake up one day and choose your identity. And sometimes you can reflect back on yourself and you can think, who was that? Back in 2004, I was in labor with my first child. I was dilated to 8 centimeters, and I wasn't even in the hospital. I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't even laying down. I was in my office and I was working on trade show graphics. And no one was forcing labor on me other than my own body, right? But I was still working because I'd promised deliverables, because that's what responsible people do, right? And I look back now and I don't even recognize that version of myself. Don't get me wrong, I still work hard. I am a hard worker, but somewhere along the way, I had turned into someone I never consciously decided or even wanted to be. I was a genuine people pleaser and probably a bit of a workaholic. I wasn't just accommodating though, right? I was a compulsive people pleaser with my family, with my clients, with my business. And here's the thing, I didn't wake up one day and choose that identity, right? My subconscious did. It chose to keep me safe, right? To keep me liked, to protect me from conflict or rejection, right? And this people-pleasing identity had been forming slowly over time, decision by decision, until I was the person who couldn't say no, even when I should have been in the hospital birthing my firstborn. And it took me years to notice. And by the time I did, that identity had already shaped everything. My boundaries, my schedule, the kinds of clients I attracted, even how I showed up in my own personal life. And that same dynamic shows up in businesses and in brands too. Because as founders and entrepreneurs, who we are bleeds into what we create. Our identities shape how we work, what we tolerate, the kinds of clients we attract, the goals we set, the expectations others start to have of us. And all of that shapes how our brand evolves. Now, before I get further along, let me just clarify what I mean when I say brand, because often there can be a little confusion and a lot of people have different definitions. But you've probably heard that brand isn't a logo, right? It isn't the colors. It isn't your website. Although those things are all a part of brand. Your brand, though, it's a perception. It's a perception that you create whether you are aware of it or not. It's a collection of associations that people build over time based on their experience with you, like how you communicate, how it feels to work with you, your values, your standards, the transformations that you create, the tone, the energy, like all the feelings that people experience when they interact with your business. And here's what's important. This applies to everyone, not just big companies with marketing departments, right? Your brand exists even if you're a solo consultant or a small business owner. If you have a business or any kind of organization, you have a brand. And it starts forming the moment someone has their first interaction with you. That person is forming an impression, right? And that impression is your brand. So that's why brands can evolve quietly and unintentionally on their own. I know mine did. Now, fair warning here, the examples I'm going to share in this video really come from my own experience as a service provider, but the principles can apply really across the board. Whether you're selling products or services, the specifics might look a little different, but the pattern is essentially the same. So be patient with me here. So one of the most common assumptions about brand that I hear is this. I hear, I don't really need brand strategy yet. I don't even have a brand. And to be fair, honestly, that assumption makes a lot of sense, especially early on, because when you can't see your brand forming yet, it's easy to assume that it doesn't exist. It's not a brand yet, right? But stay with me here, because this is the part most people don't realize until much later. You probably already have a distinct way you communicate. And people probably feel a certain way when they interact with you, or they walk into your physical location if you have one. And if you have a team, there's probably already an undercurrent of culture developing. And I will guarantee you have standards and values, because we all do, right? Those things, they start shaping the perception of your brand long before anyone can articulate them. And this leads to another assumption that I've heard some founders make. Many small business owners think brand strategy is basically another layer of marketing, but it gets treated like something you add on later, like after the traction and after things feel more stable. Because marketing feels urgent. Brand strategy feels like, well, something you can come back to when the marketing starts working, right? But here's where the disconnect lies. And this is probably, again, more about definitions than anything. Your brand strategy at its core isn't about promotion. It's about how you decide how you're going to show up in the first place. It shapes what you say yes to, what you tolerate, who you're actually for, and what you're willing to walk away from. Marketing launches, deploys, and promotes the brand, and brand strategy is the filter for the marketing, and it guides all of those tactical decisions. So here's what that looks like in this brand perception pyramid. It demonstrates the relationship between brand strategy, creative strategy, and marketing. And you can clearly see that brand strategy is at the bottom of this pyramid, while marketing is closer to the top. And the creative strategy is what links the two together. Now here's where it can get a little sideways, because even when founders understand that the brand strategy actually matters, there's a third assumption that's even more subtle. And it's the one that personally cost me years of misalignment. And this is the misunderstanding that if customers love the product or the service, then they must naturally understand the brand. And this one feels intuitively true and maybe a little obvious, right? If someone has a great experience with your work or your business, of course they get your brand. Of course they know what you're about, right? But here's what I've watched happen and what happened to me. People can love your product or your service, they can use it, they can recommend it, they can come back for more, and they can still not actually understand what your brand stands for. And I'll explain what I mean by this in a second, but just consider this. Just because customers are happy doesn't mean they understand what you want this brand to become, or maybe what you don't want it to be. And when that gap exists, your best customers can't become your best advocates, not real ones anyway, because they don't have the language to explain what you do, why you're different, or who you're actually best for. And the place this shows up most clearly is when your best customers try to refer you. They'll say things like, oh, you should work with them, they're great, which sounds positive, right? And that helps you grow visibility. That helps you grow visibility, right? That gets you more work. But that's a pretty generic referral. And if they can't articulate why they chose you over someone else, or what makes you different, or who you're actually best for, the person they're referring you to might not even be the right fit. And that slows everything down. That word of mouth weakens, and those referrals may become less and less aligned over time with the brand you are building. The brand may end up becoming something it never intended. Now, I know what you might be thinking, and I know you might be thinking like, well, isn't more customers and more revenue the goal? Does it really matter if they get me as long as they're buying my product or my service, right? You can absolutely grow without people fully understanding your brand, but that kind of growth comes with a cost. Early on, you can get away with it, right? Especially when you're personally involved, like in most of the work, like I was. Those referrals legitimately convert. Misfit clients are annoying, but they're manageable. But here's where it shifts, or at least here's where it shifted for me. Referrals started drifting off target. I kept getting referred again and again for signage and trade show graphics. Work I was good at, but work I didn't actually want to be doing. And what I wanted to be doing was branding and logo design. But because I wasn't communicating who I was as a brand, clients just assumed I did whatever they'd seen me do before, right? Or whatever their colleague needed. So the work that I ended up doing got locked into the wrong client expectations and not what I wanted to build. Remember, I was a people pleaser, so I made sure every client was happy. And here's the tragic part. I was doing that misaligned work cheap because those referrals were based on price, not value. So I'd spend hours managing massive files that would choke up my computer. I spent more time saving files than I actually did designing. All of that for fees that totally didn't reflect the effort I put into it. But I was busy and I was growing, but I wasn't building the business I actually wanted. And when clients talked about my work, price was the only thing they could easily point to. Here's what ended up happening. Because my clients couldn't explain my value clearly, I had to start doing it. Every sales call, every onboarding, every clarification. I spent half the time explaining what I wasn't. So I'd say things like, well, my work doesn't focus on aesthetics and your preferences. I'm not your typical graphic designer. I won't send you a form to fill out. I won't be the cheapest though. I don't do trade show graphics. That's not what I want to be known for. So it took a lot of effort to undo what everybody expected of me. And that's the cost of confusing customer satisfaction with understanding what your brand stands for. And don't get me wrong, I'm so grateful. I had a lot of clients who trusted me. They came back again and again, but they didn't actually understand the vision I had for my business because I couldn't clearly communicate what I wanted to be known for. So the business kept pulling me in directions I never chose. And it made my business heavier and harder. None of this killed my business though. I started my business back in 1998 and I'm still here, right? I've had to rebrand and reinvent myself so that I could do the work I wanted to for the people I genuinely wanted to do it for. But the real truth here is that people can love your product or service. They can use it, they can recommend it, and they can come back, right? And still not understand what your brand stands for. And when that happens, growth doesn't stop. It just stops being intentional. And it took me years to understand that that was what was actually happening. And this whole epiphany is essentially what shifted me from being strictly a brand identity designer to offering the strategy that I recognized I needed for myself. Because I realized what I actually needed was clarity about who I was as a brand, so I could communicate it to my clients, so the work I attracted genuinely matched what I wanted to build. So thinking that you don't have a brand yet means you're not shaping the one that's already forming. And then treating brand strategy like it's a marketing strategy means that you're promoting something you haven't even defined in the first place. And then assuming that satisfied customers will communicate your brand clearly when you're not clear on it yourself leaves everything to chance. They can only refer you based on their experience, not your intentions. So just like my people-pleasing identity formed decision by decision, right? Until I didn't recognize myself anymore, your brand is forming right now. Through every client you say yes to, every expectation you don't correct, and every referral that drifts slightly off target. And the question isn't whether you have a brand. It's whether you're shaping it intentionally, or is it shaping itself around you? And here's another reason why this is even more critical, because people decide whether your brand is trustworthy in seconds, not minutes, seconds. And there's real research on this, and I have a whole video that goes into exactly how that judgment happens and what it means for your brand. And I encourage you to watch that next. Have a good one.